Look, Ma, we're on TV. It's the College Football Insiders here on College Football Week 11. It's an incredible, incredible season so far. We're going to all break it down. I am Brandon Marcello, your host today. In this segment, I'm going to be joined by Richard Johnson and John Talty as we discuss and start the show off with the firing of Hugh Freeze down at Auburn on the Plains, one of the biggest shakeups we've seen in 7 days because we just came fresh off of the Brian Kelly firing at LSU. It's been a crazy coaching carousel cycle. Auburn, of course, moving on with Hugh Freeze having 19 losses in less than 3 seasons, the second most losses by a coach in that span in Auburn history. They are on pace to have their 5th straight losing season, which hasn't happened since the late 1940s. So we look at this coaching carousel cycle where we now have 9 big jobs in the power conferences already open, and we just entered the month of November, and there's big jobs out there. Penn State, of course, LSU, Florida, and now Auburn. But where does this Auburn game, this job, one, stack up in the game of the coaching carousel? And secondly, what kind of candidates will we see for the Auburn Tigers here moving forward, especially considering that maybe that candidate pool will be very similar at places like at LSU and Florida? John, let's start with you. What do you think of this job and its standing among all those big jobs in the coaching carousel?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was looking at the stats today, and you look at they've had all of one top 10 win season since 2015. They've had all of 2 since 2011. So I think around the industry, we view this as a top 15, top 20 job. The stats have not backed that up over the last decade plus. Of course, Gus Malzahn was able to take them to a national championship game in 2013. They went to an SEC championship game in 2017. But beyond that, there has not been a lot of success, despite there being resources to do so. I think especially recently with Hugh Freeze, they've had the NIL resources. They have great facilities. They have everything you would want to be successful. Just has not been backed up by the production on the field and resulting in wins.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day,
extremely attractive job, in my opinion. So I got a question yesterday from someone that have a relationship with around the football world. Just essentially, how would you rank or stack up the current openings? LSU, which I think you guys would agree with, is the clear number one. And for me, I put this on the same level as I do Penn State and Florida, where you have these 3 in a tier 2 type situation. Despite some of the struggles that the last few years under Hugh Freeze or going back even before that, this is still a place that is among the 10 to 15 situations on a national level where you have a realistic chance of competing for a playoff spot or should be in contention for playoff spot, SEC title, conference title on an annual basis. And look, you're going to have a lot of respected figures around the coaching world who are interested in this one. We will get into names later on, but to me, this is still an extremely attractive situation, despite Auburn being just 15 and 19 the last 3 years under Hugh Freeze, and obviously having the issues that they did pre-Hugh Freeze to go along with that.
Yeah, it's an upper half of a Power 2 conference job, which means there's a clear path to the college football playoff via potentially contending for the conference or a potential at-large spot if you can get it right. I have serious questions about how they're going to be able to keep this roster together. You're going to have to come in and immediately figure out how to retain a receiver like Cam Coleman, for instance, a receiver like Eric Singleton. Those are good players that they have in that wide receiver room. You're going to get some turnover a little bit on that offensive line that Hugh Freeze told you was 6 deep with NFL talent, yet they could not figure out how to block effectively for Jackson Arnold or Ashton Daniels. You're probably going to have to figure out how to get a portal quarterback in that can play immediately. So there are concerns on this roster and holes to fill and will need to be filled immediately by a new coach. But one thing that I think is going to be really interesting about this Auburn job moving forward is how much alignment the next Auburn head coach is going to have. It's my personal opinion that he's going to be able to enjoy a little bit more alignment than his last 2 predecessors had because they were coming into significantly fractured environment. I mean, let's be honest here. Hugh Freeze was not the first choice. If they could have had Lane Kiffin, and they quite frankly almost did, Lane Kiffin would probably still be in the job right now, but they got Hugh in. So as far as how this search is going to unfold, we know that Auburn's searches can take some twists and turns along the way the last one did. And so when this one settles, we'll see how much alignment you have, because you have a situation at LSU, for instance, where there's not a ton of alignment, or at least the alignment is out of whack. You got a situation in Florida where the alignment may be a little bit out of whack. And so where does Auburn fit as far as that's concerned?
My big thing with this job right now is that they're going to have a similar pool of candidates, and we're going to discuss that here in the next segment. But Auburn's in a good spot from the standpoint of, I think they can swoop in while LSU is still trying to figure things out, and Florida seemingly is aiming at the top dog in Lane Kiffin and might have to wait a little bit. Auburn can come in and go after a couple of these other candidates, say like a John Summerall, and go, you're our guy. We want you. We're not going to wait around and play games with you. You can come in here in December. Let's get the ball rolling. Signing day's coming up. The transfer portal window comes up in January. We have resources. We have great facilities, and we've got a lot of money we're going to put behind the next coach. That hasn't been an issue at Auburn under Hugh Freeze. The issue for Hugh Freeze has and always will be, wherever job he goes forward, is he just has not been able to metamorphosize himself into a coach that can succeed in this new era. He succeeded at Ole Miss previously in a bygone era where there was no NIL. He developed relationships over a long term. He did not like recruiting the transfer portal and being only get to know a player over a span of like 5 days to 10 days. And also schematically, his offense was a mess. Coaches that were opposing them were not very impressed at all.
Two things unfortunate for Hugh Freeze. So first of all, I know that Auburn fans probably reached the point of rolling their eyes when he would throw out about how close they were and how they could have easily been a 1 or 2 loss team or whatever at different points during the course of this year. That was legitimate, though. There were multiple games this season that could have easily won and should have won. And unfortunately for Hugh Freeze, it didn't work out like it easily could have. But to go along with that, and this is something that was a factor with the Auburn athletic department just while working through this, that there was a level of awareness there of the amount of talent that they have on this roster, and essentially the amount of talent that's being wasted right now because of issues at the quarterback position, just overall not being able to maximize guys that, I mean, you have several that are going to be NFL draft picks next year, and others like Cam Coleman who have a chance to be first-round players at some point down the road. So the lack of being able to take advantage of some of this next level of talent is something that was a definite source of frustration for the Auburn athletic department throughout the course of the season, and obviously as they work through this decision.
Close isn't good enough. If you're not first, you're last. We will be back on the College Football Insiders after this commercial break. Welcome back to the College Football Insiders. We are continuing our discussion here on the Auburn job opening. Hugh Freeze is out. And of course, now the attention immediately turns to candidates out there. And as we discussed on the previous segment, similar candidate pool to some jobs, especially probably LSU. Guys, I want to start with you, John. You are in the state of Alabama. You know that university very well. Who are some of the more realistic candidates here that Auburn has a shot at getting?
Well, Brent, I think you made a really smart point earlier that maybe one of the advantages that Auburn could have is that they're not waiting on Lane Kiffin this time around. They went down that road before. It didn't work out. Whereas Florida and OSU might have to wait on Lane, and that could include a playoff trip. It could include multiple wins. So there's an opportunity to be aggressive and decisive for what maybe is that next step down in terms of available coaches. So that's a Tulane's John Summerall. It's a Georgia Tech's Brent Key. It's an Arizona State's Kenny Dillingham. There's multiple guys who I think would make a lot of sense at Auburn. And if you can be aggressive and go after them before maybe Florida, LSU, Penn State move to their option B, gives you a chance to get a really great coach. And having the resources that they have, having the talent that you guys all mentioned on the roster, I think could be very attractive to these coaches, knowing I can come in and probably immediately do better than what Hugh Freeze has done the last 3 years and immediately buy myself some credibility and stability in this job and with that fan base.
Matt, when you talk to your sources out there, the agents and everything, what's kind of the gist of how they view this job opening at Auburn and the interest level that there will be?
Well, first of all, with Lane Kiffin specifically, I think we would all agree that the jobs to keep an eye on with Lane Kiffin are a combination of LSU, which are still a level of unknown with in terms of just Lane with that. It's clear that Florida is one to keep an eye on with Lane. And also, it'd be premature to rule out just Ole Miss doing everything that they can to keep Lane and him potentially staying put there. Lane is a huge wild card. It's extremely difficult to predict what Lane is going to do. Maybe one of the tougher people to make predictions on around the coaching world. But those would be the three primary ones to keep an eye on with him. With Auburn, John hit on a couple names that I would fully anticipate being on the radar for John Cohen and the decision makers there, with, in no particular order, Brent Key, who's from Alabama, has coached in the state of Alabama as the offensive line coach under Nick Saban, has SEC ties, doing a great job at Georgia Tech, even though they lost to NC State this past weekend. Would expect to be for him to be on the radar for that. John Sumrall has had continued success at the combination of Troy and now Tulane to go along with that. He's someone who is from the state. His wife is Auburn grad, has relationships with a number of high school coaches around the state. There's value in that, obviously. And then you can go down the list. There are coaches that are having success in the conference right now, like, for example, an Eli Drinkowitz, who was a GA at Auburn at one point. Does Auburn take a look at someone like that and see if there's any interest in making the move to another SEC school? Clark Lee doing a hell of a job at Vanderbilt right now. That there are going to be multiple places that have Clark as a person of interest for that one. And then last one that I'll throw out, who's going to be a wild card just heading into the cycle as a whole, is James Franklin. So James Franklin, there's interest on the end of Virginia Tech right now in James, but there are also some other jobs, including potentially even this one, that could have some level of interest in James also. And it does continue to be more and more clear just that James on his end has interest in getting back into this immediately for the right opportunity.
Richard, I wanted to bring something up. You're a Florida guy. So I heard something interesting this week about Lane Kiffin, something that no one's really talked about. Lane Kiffin might have interest in the NFL.
Running it back,
more so than Florida or LSU, or even coming back to Ole Miss, depending on how things go at Ole Miss this year as they make their push toward the playoff. That could change a lot of things if Lane Kiffin, one, says, hey, I'm staying at Ole Miss, or two, we start hearing more murmurs about the NFL as I started hearing this weekend, which was interesting. That could throw a lot of jobs up for a loop.
Yeah, Florida and LSU kind of in the same bucket there with that, are we going to wait on Lane discussion? Considering that, I think it's pretty clear Ole Miss is going to be in the college football playoff. They are certainly tracking that direction. If that's the case, you're waiting until Christmas to have a head football coach. That's just the nature of things. The earliest a first-round college football playoff game can be played, December 19th, maybe December 20th. So you're going to be waiting. If he really is going to flirt with the NFL, well, then you're waiting until mid-January to get a college football coach in for a high-level program. Don't know if Florida fans are going to want to wait. Don't know if that's the case. I think you have a situation with James Franklin, who is kind of in the same bucket as somebody like John Summerall, who may be available much earlier on in December. It doesn't look like Tulane's going to make the college football playoff right now. They got a pretty long shot. So Franklin, heck, you could hire Franklin right now if you really wanted to put, $30 million per year or something absolutely incredible like that in front of him to kind of force a hand. Not saying that Auburn would do that, just kind of gaming that out a little bit. I am interested in if we start to get really off the beaten path here with some guys who are on the fence, because I think will tell you the shape of the search and who's trying to get involved. If you start hearing legitimately a Jimbo Fisher's name, if you start to hear legitimately a John Gruden's name, that's going to signal to me that different hands are trying to get in the pot here outside of the tight circle that John Cohen, the athletic director, would like to keep. That means that you're going to get this wild Auburn booster-led search that we've had the last few times. I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm just saying that if you start to significantly hear Jimbo's name, for instance, get into the mix, that's what it's going to say to me.
It's interesting. You mentioned the booster. You mentioned the booster thing there at Auburn. That's always been kind of the talk. This last cycle was interesting. They were pretty much all on board with Lane Kiffin. And then once that didn't work out, everybody was like, yeah, let's go get Hugh Freeze. The previous coaching search, he had an athletic director in Alan Green, who was facing an onslaught from boosters going, hey, let's elevate the defensive coordinator, Kevin Steele. And he was like, we're not doing that. I'm going to go do my own thing. It ended up being a disaster with Brian Harsin. So things have changed a little bit at Auburn. What you've ended up seeing is like, you've blocked the boosters out and then all the boosters get on the same page. And now with this being a new segment here, I wonder if it's going to be an agglomeration of all that or what's it going to look like? I do get the feeling from talking to people there earlier, and John, you have as well, that it does seem like they're a little bit more on the same page this go around than say they were 2 cycles ago when they ended up getting Brian Harsin, but we'll see.
I think that they are, and I think it helps that. Let me just say real fast, man. I think it helps that they have more stability at the university level. They have a president that people have gotten behind. You think back 2 cycles ago, they had an interim president. They had to bring Jay Goudge back into the mix. There are a lot of different factions there. I think you have more stability at the president and AD level. Those boosters are still involved, and if it feels like it's going off the rails, they'll step in. But I think having a president like Chris Roberts, I think, does help kind of calm those waters in Auburn.
So we've talked a lot about Auburn. Just to shift back to Florida real quick, and Richard, you can share your thoughts, especially with just your ties to Florida being what they are on this. But let's say hypothetically, Lane is not the hire at Florida. I think one of the names to keep an eye on there is a possibility, and I'm not saying it would be the only one, is a Jed Fish. So Jed just as a whole is going to be an interesting name to keep an eye on going into this cycle. There are schools like UCLA that seem to have interest in Jed, who's continued to do a strong job at Washington, has them at 6-2 right now. They're going to be favored in each of their next 3 games. Could be 9-2 heading into final regular season game against Oregon. And I could see Jed being among the guys that, if it's not Lane, could be on the radar as at the very least a conversation person for Florida as they navigate through this process. And one of the interesting things with Jed, obviously, as you guys know, Florida alum, graduated from there late 90s, has the ties that he does to the school. So just someone as a whole, whether it's Florida or something else, that just worth keeping an eye on heading into this cycle and is going to be of interest to some of these places with openings.
Yeah, I would also think that Brent Key would also potentially get in the mix at Florida. He obviously has clear ties to Alabama, but he's got really clear ties in the state of Florida. He was at UCF for a long time as a recruiting coordinator and an offensive staffer at UCF years ago. So just pay attention to Brent Key as well, who could get in the mix if it's not Lane, if potentially Lane is either goes to LSU or is retained at Ole Miss. Ole Miss has been very clear, has athletic director Keith Carter, that they are working to retain Lane Kiffin. When you look at the landscape, you see Kurt Cignetti get a quick extension. You see Matt Rule get a quick extension. You see Rhett Lashley get a quick extension. Those are preemptive strikes by those schools to get their guys locked up before we even get into November. So there's not even a hint of a conversation of a flirtation. Ole Miss, a little bit different with Lane Kiffin right now. I'm sure Ole Miss has something in front of him or is working to get something in front of him, but Lane Kiffin hasn't really signed that as yet. So we'll see how that works as the cycle gets deeper into November.
Yeah, Lane likes the dramatics there, the 11th hour.
Yeah, well, there's one common denominator. All the guys you just mentioned, Richard, do not have Jimmy Sexton as their agent. And so it's very against Jimmy's strategy to take a deal in the middle of the season. You can play the leverage at the end of the game. And I think that's, in part what makes the Lane sweepstakes so interesting.
I do wonder, though,
if these guys heading into this process, so I will say, and this is something that's come up in multiple conversations during the course of the last few days, is Matt Rule getting the deal done that he did with Nebraska, Rhett getting the deal done that he did with SMU. That's something has not gone unnoticed with other head coaches. has not gone unnoticed with coaching agents. And like with Matt Rule specifically, I don't think Nebraska is ranked right now. You guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but uh, there are some coaches that feel like if Matt Rule is making $12 million a year, that they have a strong case to be making somewhere at the very least in a similar type range. So it creates some leverage there and is going to lead to some conversations for some head coaches that are having some success right now.
These poor coaches, they're so poor. They don't have any money. Will you please help? We'll be back after this on the College Football Insiders. Welcome back to the College Football Insiders here on CBS Sports Network. We've changed things up. We've mixed the deck here. We got John Talty, we got Chris Hummer, and Shahan Jayaraja joining us. And we're going to get into what's going on at Clemson. The Tigers are just terrible this year. They're 3-5. Dabo Swinney's upset. We got questions about his job security now all of a sudden. And the reason why we bring this up is because the man himself, Dabo Swinney, brought attention to himself after their 46-45 loss to Duke at home this past weekend. At his press conference, Dabo Swinney said, quote, "I may get fired today. Graham's sitting there in the back," Graham being Graham Neff, their athletics director. "So I don't know. Can't say I'd blame him." So Dabo's done things like this before. He's got some thin skin. We all kind of know that right now. I've talked to some people there on the ground at Clemson. He's not in trouble, other than with the ACC, who fined him in the school, by the way, for criticizing referees in that game. But he's fine. He's going to keep his job there. Nothing's going to happen to Dabo Swinney because of what's happening this year, and for that matter, the last 3 or 4 years, if you want to argue here in this NIL era. But you're seeing it on the screen right now. This 8-game stretch where they have started the season at 3-5, my goodness, it's the second worst here in this era behind Tommy West. And this is a program that some of us, including someone who's on the screen right now, said that they'd probably win the national championship this year. So, Chris Hummer, what the heck is going on with Dabo Swinney and Clemson? Why is Dabo going off the deep end right now?
Well, first, it's the worst start for any preseason top 5 team in the last 25 years. So not great for Clemson, not great for my preseason pick. So apologies for those of you who followed me with your money at some point there. But Clemson's got a lot of issues. This has always been a program with Dabo Swinney that has been run a certain way under Dabo Swinney's direction. It's Dabo Swinney's culture. It's Dabo Swinney's way. It's Clemson's way. And I think at the end of the day, this comes down to the idea of adaptability. I mean, people would argue Dabo Swinney has changed a little bit, changed coordinators, took a couple transfers. But Dabo Swinney still hasn't gone all in on this era of college athletics. And I think what you're seeing right now is a message and a coach who's gotten a little stale. And Brandon, just like you, have been talking to people about Clemson this year, and I would expect staff changes this offseason. You can't remain static with what's happening. But at the end of the day, like, staff changes aren't going to change a lot for Clemson unless Dabo Swinney embraces the new era of college football. You got to give out more high school offers. You got to expand your offer pool. You can't tell players that if they visit somewhere, they're going to lose their scholarship that are committed. You've got to take more transfers. You have to buy more into NIL and the rev share. You have to be willing to pay younger players. There's a lot that needs to change for Clemson, and I think this offseason is going to be very reflective of how Dabo Swinney is going to approach the rest of his career.
It's interesting that you mention all of that.
I wanted to get to you. John, I wanted to get to you on this as well, because you talk about the transfer portal, and we all know the storyline there. He's only getting a couple of transfers really in this entire era. But the number one thing that I hear from folks is that they don't reward the freshmen financially very much so. And that's continued even in this rev share era, where Clemson honestly is sharing more percentage-wise than a lot of their ACC brethren. They're averaging about 85% of that $20.5 million going to the football roster, but they're not giving it to the freshmen. They're giving it to guys who stick around the program their junior and senior years.
And in theory, that makes sense, right? You reward the guys who are producing on the field rather than trying to make a projection. And I think depending on where you are in the college football ecosystem, some are afforded that opportunity. I know Chris has written stories about Maryland almost going the opposite direction of like, we have to bet more on freshmen to get them in the building and hope that our projections are right. So you can take different paths, but it has been a challenge, I think, for them. And I think one of the issues coming up is this is a roster that had a lot of NFL talent on it they spent up to retain. A lot of it is going to be moving on. And now, do you have enough talent coming through the pipeline to be rewarded as upperclassmen? I think that they're going to have a bit of a gap in terms of what the talent they need to be competing at the highest levels of the ACC. And I think it's why they're going to have to make changes, whether that's strategy-wise from recruiting and portal to even just the type of people that they're having coaching and developing them once they get on campus.
It's worth noting real quick that Clemson hasn't had a top 10 class since 2022 out of high school. And if that's going to be your approach, you need to land those guys consistently. And Clemson is not doing that right now. And it just leads to an offseason where you're going to have to make a lot of decisions about how you want to run the program. Because like, as John said, if you want to fix this roster right away, you got to embrace the portal in a way we've never seen Dabo Swinney do before. And we're going to learn a lot about how stubborn or not stubborn he's going to choose to be about it come December or January.
John, did you have a take on this? I wanted to reach out to you here. What do you got?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting about this, right, is that we can point to obviously all the issues that they've had roster building, but I think what's striking about this 2025 team is this really isn't a players issue, right? I mean, they have guys at the top of the roster that we expected to be NFL draft picks. They have a quarterback who is being talked about as a potential first rounder. They have receivers who seem to stack up with some of the best in the ACC. So it's not, I think, just a question of talent acquisition. I think that Dabo also has to look at the way that his developmental system is being put in place. Because even if you want to look at the coordinators, both of them, Garrett Riley and Tom Allen, are external hires as well. This is a program that at its best has been developmental, like we've talked about. And I think that that's the biggest thing is you kind of have to find ways to deal with this new culture. I think that Dabo in some cases has come out and said, look, we're going to start paying guys. We're going to take a few transfers. We're going to take some outside staffers. But I don't know that his approach has changed along with it, because you do have to manage players that you are paying when they come in differently. You do have to manage transfers differently. You do have to manage staff a little differently. And I think you look up now, even with the roster that still seems it's pretty good, they just haven't done that.
I've also heard some interesting things about, because the coaching carousel is going to be so wild, we're going to have a record number of openings, and especially even at some mid-tier to even higher tier power programs. Would Dabo consider leaving Clemson to take another job and not necessarily hit the restart button on his career, but just to go somewhere and where he might not face as much criticism, at least for the first couple of years? His buyout, if he were to leave Clemson, I've been told somewhere about between $3 to $4 million. So if there's some school out there, especially a mid-tier program, if they want to take a chance or something like that, that could be a possibility. It's just that I don't think Dabo really has any interest in leaving. But Dabo's comments here lately are sounding more and more like Mike Gundy when Gundy was in the end days there at Oklahoma State. He's like, the next thing I'm waiting for is he could fire me here today and then I'll just go coach somewhere else. That's the only thing that's missing that would echo what Mike Gundy sounded like his last year and a half, 2 years at Oklahoma State.
Do y'all think Scott Woodward's really disappointed he couldn't offer Dabo Swinney $100 million?
The ultimate Scott swing. I will just say very quickly, I checked in with someone recently who said that Dabo's not looking to leave. But of course, that could change if the pressure continues to crank up. I just think he's stubborn and thinks I can find a way to make it work here. Just the question is whether he's actually able to.
Yeah, it's always interesting with Dabo Swinney. He's the one of the last of a dying breed, really, in this new era of college football, and we'll see what the next year holds for him. But yes, as we reported here, expect staff changes there among the assistant coaches. We're going to talk much more about some issues going around college football, including at Colorado, where Deion Sanders and Colorado are slumping. What's the future hold for Coach Prime? Coming up next after this commercial break. Welcome back to the College Football Insiders. I am Brandon Marcello, joined by Chris Hummer and Shahan Jayaraj. We're going to talk about some of the bigger disappointments that maybe we're not talking a lot about because there's coaching changes have really been dominating everything in addition to the playoff race. But let's turn our attention out west to what's happening at Colorado with the Buffaloes and Coach Prime, Deion Sanders. The Buffs struggling here down the stretch and have been just absolutely obliterated in some games. And we just saw it this past week. In fact, they're in Colorado. When your student section's taking their shirts off and celebrating, as we've seen the new craze going around, your football team's probably not doing so well. But we know that Deion Sanders has gone through a lot over the last calendar year. He's had health scares. He's battled bladder cancer. Came back from that after a procedure. We've seen that he's had a tent there on the sideline to help him with his bathroom issues. Of course, he's also had to have surgery in the middle of the season on his continuing issues with his legs and blood clots. And of course, on the football field, he went into this year, we knew it was going to be a bit of a rebuild because he lost Travis Hunter, the Heisman Trophy winner, and his son, Shedeur Sanders, at quarterback. But I'm not so sure we're expecting blowouts like this. And it prompts questions, guys, about Deion Sanders' future. He's not going to get fired or anything like that. And, of course, his buyout is astronomical. I think it's around $33 million. But there are questions about whether Deion Sanders maybe will come back next season on his own. Will he decide to come back? What do we think here, gentlemen? I want to start with you, Shahan. What do you think the future holds for Mr. Deion Sanders?
Well, I wrote a piece on CBS Sports after the game last week, and the reality is this. In the first half of their last two games, they've been outscored 81-7. And it's one thing to get outscored by a lot against Utah. Arizona's a much improved team, but they're not the sort of team that should be putting you into the ground that early on. And look, everybody's talked a lot about the 1-11 team that Deion Sanders took over for. And that's real. I mean, obviously they took over for a very bad team, but this level of bad is actually pretty unusual in Colorado history. If you look at the past decade, they've only lost consecutive games by 5 touchdowns twice, and one was during the 1-11 season. The second one was this season. So things aren't working right now at Colorado. And the thing I was most interested by heading into this 2025 season was just the simple question of what does a Colorado team and what does a Deion Sanders team look like that isn't quarterbacked by one of his sons? And I think that you kind of see Deion Sanders talk about it. He hasn't had to deal with that issue at any level of football because Shedeur has always been his quarterback outside of the spring season at Jackson State. And while quarterback isn't the only problem, it's certainly a big one. They cycled through 3 quarterbacks last week. Julian Lewis apparently is going to get the start this upcoming week as they try to find any momentum. I just don't see what a future under Deion Sanders looks like. They haven't recruited high school at a high level. They have the 67th ranked high school recruiting class in 2026. And the reality is this, they're probably looking, if Deion comes back, at completely resetting the deck, both on the roster and in the coaching staff.
Chris,
I'd say 2 things about
going into next season.
Well, I would first want to start with Deion because he has supreme job security. Like anybody pretending he doesn't isn't realizing the situation of Colorado. Like Deion Sanders has transformed Colorado the university. He has made Colorado a relevant football program again in the 21st century. And that matters. Like he is not going to get fired. His decision, if there is one, will come down to him and his health issues. And people can speculate all they want. And I have plenty of sources that have speculated that Deion could step down. But at the end of the day, like Deion has a smaller circle than anybody in college football. He is one of the few coaches I feel confident in saying like nobody really knows except for 2 or 3 people. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I know what's going to happen to Deion Sanders at the end of this year. So his status is up in the air. But if he does come back, yeah, the roster needs to take a step forward. Like Julian Lewis is their hope at quarterback moving forward. He is the guy they swung really big on in the 2025 class to get. He's a true freshman. He played pretty well this weekend. There is some momentum with him, but as Shahan said, you are going to have to reload across the roster. You're going to have to be aggressive in the portal again because Colorado just doesn't deal with high school recruiting the same way other teams do. Like Deion Sanders still doesn't go on the road to recruit high school prospects, which is very unusual. He doesn't do in-home visits. So Deion Sanders is going to have to win in the portal again. And as we've seen, sometimes you can hit a jackpot in the portal, but it's really hard to stack consistent wins with just portal recruiting.
I want to look over out east where we're talking about another disappointment, another disappointing fall here for Miami. The Hurricanes now 4-11 under Mario Cristobal in the months of November and December following their loss to SMU on the road. Miami now dropping out of the top 10. Their playoff hopes very much flatlining. There's a beep every few seconds here, but it looks like Miami's in a position where they're just going to have to win the ACC championship game to get to the playoff. And I hear a lot of arguments that this is one of the most disappointing storylines over these last 2 years when we talk about the buildup of a roster, the talent that's in place, and yet they falter time and time again down the stretch and can't get into the playoff. The common denominator here is the man you see on your screen, head coach Mario Cristobal. Is this a Mario Cristobal issue, or is there something else going on with Miami when it comes to these late season thuds?
Well, and let's not just look at late season. Let's look at late game situations. In that SMU game, Miami had the lead and was able to put them away, and they commit a horrendous roughing the passer call after the whistle was blown, right? These are the sorts of things that if they happen once or twice are bad luck. But they happen repeatedly under Mario Cristobal at Miami. And actually, if you even go back to his Oregon tenure, this was a little bit of an issue as well. They've just struggled to handle these late game situations, and it's cost them dearly. You look at your screen, at SMU, a 6-point loss, Louisville, a 3-point loss. And if you look in the first half of the season, I mean, they beat number 6 Notre Dame, number 18 South Florida. They beat a Florida State team that we thought was really good. Frankly, in the last 7 games of the year, this wasn't supposed to be a situation where they're playing competitive games. They were supposed to roll through the rest of the ACC. And you mentioned the idea that they probably need to win the ACC to make the playoff. Here's the issue. They have 2 losses at this point. There are numerous teams with 0 or 1 losses in ACC play, so even just a pathway to reaching the ACC championship game looks like it's almost off the table.
I think the last 5 or 6 years have proven Mario Cristobal is a very high floor coach. Like, the floor is here. The problem is the ceiling seems to be like right there, right? He gets in his own way consistently as a coach. He's extremely conservative in late game situations.
Yeah.
Like, if you look at the game on Saturday, penalties and ill-time turnovers by Carson Beck really cost the team. And that's not unusual for Miami and Mario Cristobal. I think Mario Cristobal, if you talk to people around him, he is a very hard person to work for in a lot of ways. He grinds like kind of in the Nick Saban mold, but he is also like somebody who likes to manage multiple elements of the team. And I sometimes wonder if he would be better off stepping back a little bit and letting everybody handle their roles, and just focus on the situational football. It's not the same. Like, Ryan Day and Mario Cristobal are not the same, but we saw what happened with Ryan Day when he gave Chip Kelly play calling duties for a year. Like, he was able to step back and be a CEO. And I know Mario Cristobal is not calling plays for Miami on either side of the ball. But I think if he focused on being a CEO and focused on game management situations, Miami would be a lot better off. And you would have fewer of these collapses.
And we saw it on the sideline. You saw him and Shannon Dawson getting into it, their offensive coordinator at Miami. And as you said, this has been an issue for Mario Cristobal where he micromanages a lot of situations, especially in game. Heck, I could argue that maybe they would have lost that Florida State game where they were dominant and they went completely in their shell and let Florida State come back into it. There was 2 more minutes in that game. Florida State maybe wins it, which would have been a devastating loss. This is Mario Cristobal written all over it. As much as he like perfectly fits Miami, being an alum and galvanizing that community, and he's a grinder, absolutely understands the element. All that looks great on paper, and then when you put the paper up to light, you see right through it when we get to late seasons and late game situations.
And he's a hell of a coach. He has transformed Miami. He has made Miami more like the Miami we remember from our childhoods than any coach the last 25 years. But like, we've seen pretty consistently, like, since his time at Oregon, like, when he needs to get to that final step or two, like, he hasn't been able to get there. And I think it's because he often gets in his own way.
And college football just kind of playoff rankings come out. Go ahead, Shahan.
No, just to kind of close this out, I mean, the reality is this. I think that it's often easy to watch tape and review offensive coordinators, defensive coordinators. How much of the time is a head coach reviewing how they're managing a game and consistently the mistakes that they're making? I think that's something to look at.
College football playoff rankings come out Tuesday. We're going to make some quick predictions, the storylines you need to look at going into Tuesday, the first of several rankings that will come out before we actually get to Selection Sunday in December. You're watching the College Football Insiders here on CBS Sports Network. Welcome back to the College Football Insiders. Brandon Marcello, Chris Hummer, and Shahan Jayaraja. Hey, the college football playoff rankings will be released Tuesday night in a made-for-TV extravaganza where the rankings will cause debate, and they really don't matter because nothing matters until Selection Sunday in December after we get all our conference championship games out of the way. But, hey, at least it gives us a little window into what the playoff committee is thinking with their selection process in the future. Me, personally, I'm just wanting to see how many SEC teams we get in the top 12, and then also whether A&M is above Alabama, A&M being undefeated, Alabama with one loss. I could see an argument for Alabama over A&M in those initial rankings. What are you guys looking at?
Well, I think for me, I think that the first one of these is always the most interesting outside of the last one because we see where the committee diverges from the AP top 25. So the thing I'll most be looking for is when you look at those teams competing for the 9, 10, 11 spot, especially in the ACC and the Big 12, does the committee have any differences than what we've seen from the AP? I'm thinking of a team like BYU, which has a big win over Utah and heads undefeated into their game against Texas Tech. Where do they compare to Georgia Tech? Where do they compare to Miami? Or even if you want to get into Notre Dame, I think that could have major implications for whether the ACC or Big 12 or Notre Dame is that last team in.
For me, I want to look at two things. I want to see Notre Dame specifically. I want to know where Notre Dame stacks up given their early season schedule. Notre Dame is a team with 2 early losses to Miami and Texas A&M. But a big win over USC 2 weeks ago. Does the committee treat the Irish like a legitimate playoff contender and a legitimate playoff threat? If you see them in the top 12, Notre Dame's probably going to end up making the playoff end of the year if they run the table, which I would expect Notre Dame to, and they're the odds-on favorite to do so. I'm also curious how the committee treats the top teams of the Big Ten. Obviously, I think Ohio State and Indiana will probably be 1, 2, or 3 in the list, but Oregon is a team I'm very interested in. That's an Oregon team with a loss to Indiana and no top 25 wins outside of that. I don't even believe they have I don't even think they have a win over a team with a winning record in conference play so far this year.
Thanks, James Franklin.
So very curious what happens with the Nittany Lions or with the Ducks on Tuesday night.
Yeah, they have one win against a team with a winning record, and that's Northwestern.
Okay, apologies to the Wildcats.
Oh, man.
I'm also interested to see how many SEC teams are in, let's say, the top 12, as I was mentioning earlier. Could we see as many as 6 if it gets too wild? Is it possible?
I mean, when we were going to our midseason expert picks, I had 5 in the field, right? And things have changed a little bit. I think that things have actually trended the wrong way in some ways with Missouri losing their quarterback, with Vanderbilt losing to Texas. We'll see, obviously, what happens with Texas against Georgia and Texas A&M. But I absolutely could see that many in the field. I think that we'll definitely have 6 or 7 in the top 13 to 14. And so it'll be kind of interesting to see which ones are at the front of the pecking order. But a lot of them do play each other to end the year.
Yep. Group of 6 team. Do we think it's Memphis?
Probably Memphis. I think South Florida's the best team, but they lost to Memphis. So what you gonna do? So I think Memphis, though, comes in as the top team. They'll keep an eye on San Diego State and on James Madison.
Yeah, I'll be very curious if James Madison's ranked. I don't think people talk enough about the Dukes and their playoff candidacy. They have been dominant this year outside of a close loss to them.
Yeah, I've actually got James Madison in my top 25 right now, but we'll see. Thank you for watching the College Football Insiders here on CBS Sports Network. Make sure to check us out on YouTube as well. I'm Brandon Marcello. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you down the road.